We're going to be entering a new category then. I'm not going to put all of them up again, but I'm just going to show you what we're looking at. We've looked at one category, two, we're going to be on three. Those number one dealt with virtues that speak of an absence of inner moral defect. Those they were four under that. Under the second category, we've looked at three there, those that relate specifically to God. And then under number three, we're going to look at those that relate specifically to yourself. That's what we're looking at anyway, responsibilities to yourself. So we've looked at four here, we've looked at three here. We'll probably look somewhere in the vicinity of five here. And our largest category will be this fourth one, that then will have four parts. To let you know where we're headed. And we'll look at many, many under this fourth one. We're going to be under the third category. This is the way I have them broken down. Then a lack of inner moral defect. Number two, those that relate to God, like faith and hope and peace. We covered peace last time, faith, hope, and peace. 5, 4, 5, 6, 7, somewhere 5. This third category of those that relate to yourself. And under number 4, we'll get to that later, but it will have 4 divisions. Joy is what we're going to look at tonight. The virtue of joy. We're to something, interestingly enough, I found this to be extremely interesting in my studies, we're to something that is a unique Christian virtue. We've almost said this about everything, but it's really true. These things are unique among Christians and in Christianity, and they just don't exist outside that. You don't even find it in other ethical systems. You can study some of the great writings of, especially in the past centuries or so, great ethicists, and one thing that they've all noted is just the extreme position of despair that ancient philosophy had. We're thinking now and speaking specifically of Greek philosophy, but it fits in American philosophy as well. That is, philosophy that has entered the American scene through a John Stuart Mill or whomever. Extreme despair, no joy. Some people in the past have looked upon joy as either effeminate or childish. That seemed to be the view of the ancient Greek philosophers. That to be too happy, too glad, too smiling was to manifest an effeminate or a childish characteristic. That's interesting. That was never true in ancient Israel, and it's never been true in the Christian church. Joy has been looked upon as effeminacy or childishness. You know, when you just see someone, particularly if it's a man, who is too joyful, who's too happy, who's too smiling, we think now that is either childish or it's womanly, one or the other. We fail to understand, if we think that, and many people in the past have, we fail to understand how heavenly of a virtue it really is. And it's supposed to transcend culture, transcend time, transcend gender distinctions as well. In 1 Thessalonians 1:6, it's spoken of as a heavenly virtue that originates in the Holy Spirit. There seems to be in the New Testament a peculiar connection between the Holy Spirit and joy. That's not charismatic doctrine. I mean, that is charismatic doctrine, but I'm not saying what I'm saying based on charismatic doctrine, but based on what appears to be true in the New Testament. But it just so happens that isn't it interesting that charismatic people are generally joyful people? If you're going to compare and contrast charismatics with non-charismatics, charismatic people are joyful. Why? 1 Thessalonians 1 and verse 6, "And you became followers of us and of the Lord, having received the word," you people in Thessalonica, "in much affliction with joy of the Holy Spirit." One thing you see here is that joy does not rule out all affliction, because they had joy in their affliction. You can have joy in times when you're not being afflicted, but according to the Scriptures, we should have joy even in times of affliction. And it is called there, very peculiarly so, the joy of the Holy Spirit. In Galatians 5:20, it's the fruit of the Spirit, joy. Romans 10:17. The kingdom is not in meat or in drink, but in joy. Righteousness, peace, and joy. The ancient Greeks, not only did they think of this as an effeminate or a childish trait, that was their view of joy. What was their outlook on life itself then? They taught the doctrine of resignation. I want to mention a few things about this. We're going to probably get a little deeper maybe than we were with peace. I enjoyed teaching the message on peace, but I think that I'm going to enjoy teaching this message even more. A very interesting topic, and there are some deep things. I'm going to be quoting some or reading some from Henry and reading some from some other philosophers, 20th century and 19th century philosophers as well, Christian ethicists, the comments that they've had to make about joy. Ancient Greeks, especially in the Stoic form of philosophy, taught the doctrine of resignation. Resignation. That means to resign yourself to something. The Stoics believed in fate, F-A-T-E, not faith, F-A-I-T-H. They believed in fate, and therefore if fate is true, then man's responsibility is to resign himself to that. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't change it. So why be happy about it, but why be sad about it? Why be either thing? Just resign yourself to the inevitable that's sooner or later to come, and you will exist in this life. It ruled out then, it brought about the eradication of human emotion then. It was pitted against sadness on one hand, but it was pitted against gladness on the other. You weren't to be too lifted up or too brought down. It's what Calvin referred to as the iron-fisted or the iron-hearted philosophy. Just an iron heart, a cold, indifferent attitude. Maybe that's a good way to describe it. Not only was it resignation, but it was extreme despair of indifference. The person's not positive, the person is not negative, but the Greek doctrine of resignation taught no sadness, no gladness. You'll find your life to exist somewhere in between. You find people even today that try to live in that sense, try to live by that philosophy of ruling out all sense of human emotion, all gladness, all sadness, all rejoicing, all sorrow, all being lifted up, all being trodden down, but exist somewhere in between. And their reasoning was that if you exist somewhere in between, then nothing can catch you by surprise. How many times have you tried to be joyful, and then you found out the whole story about the matter, and it really was a bad thing? And so you went from joy all the way down to, just disappointed. Or one time you were extremely disappointed until you found out all the facts about the matter. And it wasn't like you had heard it reported by someone else, and now you're just elated. The Stoics said, away with all of this ballooning back and forth. Somewhere in between is where we should all live our life. And so we should have on perhaps a gray suit, gray gloves, gray boots, a gray cap, gray skin, gray hair, no smile, but no frown. Not even the partial smile of a Mona Lisa, just somewhere in between a smile and not a smile, which is no smile, which is just resignation to fate, acceptance of indifference as one's lot in life. Now that was the Greek philosophy. That was the philosophy of the Mediterranean world, the same world into which Christ was born and the message of Christianity was brought. We know that in ancient Israel, since Christian ethics was based on Hebrew ethics, it was a development of that, more light shed upon that. But Israel nevertheless had the truth about these matters. We find the concept of joy and the doctrine of joy in the Old Testament. But so much of Christianity, remember, after just a relatively short period of time, spilled beyond the bounds of Palestine and went to, among other places, Greece, Athens, and Corinth, and Philippi, and Thessalonica, and Berea. All of these other places in Greece where obviously Greek philosophy was well rooted and grounded. And one of the chief philosophies there being the doctrines of the Stoics. You either were an Epicurean or a Stoic, as we read over in Acts chapter 17, and Stoicism was something appealing to people. I think that in my observations of people even in 20th century America today. Stoicism seems to be something that's appealing. What it does, it gives you the false appearance of maturity. That's what it does. A person who's not too happy, who's not too sad, what that is supposed to show about you is I've weathered all of the ups and downs in life, and now I'm mature. I'm mature. And I don't smile and I don't frown. I'm not sad and I'm not glad. I'm just somewhere in between. That's my observation. It presents to other people a false, deceptive sense of maturity. And we're not talking about 60-year-old people. We're talking about 15-year-old people. I've seen 15-year-old people that had this stoic doctrine, not optimistic, not pessimistic, not sad, not glad. They're almost impossible to read what's going on in their mind because there's no expression. They are expressionless and emotionless. They don't have emotions. They don't have expressions, at least that they manifest. They have this despair of indifference. They might not think it's despair, but it certainly is indifference there. I don't care. I don't care what happens one way or the other. So into this world, Christianity was birthed, and it brought this message of joy. Let's look at the words to begin with, and we'll get into some of the Christian philosophy behind this concept and behind this term. I hope you'll pay careful attention this evening and try to learn a thing or two from this. There are many different words in the Old Testament, many different synonyms that are used in the Hebrew Old Testament that can be translated by such things as joy, gladness, myrrh, rejoice, even words like shine or light or bright. That's interesting that those can be English synonyms for some of the Hebrew words that are used. We're not going to look at the Hebrew words, though. We're just going to look at the Greek words, two particular ones that are of significant importance. We'll look at a noun and we'll look at a verb. C-H-A-R-A, chara. C-H-A-R-A. It's a Greek noun for joy that pops up 59 times in the New Testament. Most of the time being translated something like joy, such as 1 Thessalonians 1:6, the only three passages at which we've looked thus far, Galatians 5:22 and Romans 14:17. Kara. There are a couple of places that we will briefly look at to change, though, if you'll begin in the KJV anyway. If you'll begin over in Mark chapter 4 and verse 16. Mark 4 and verse 16. Gladness is another word. And sometimes, a couple of times, it's mistranslated gladness. Not that the two aren't obviously very, very closely related to one another, joy and gladness, but sometimes they're used in the same verse, though. Mark 4 and verse 16. And joy is by far the more important, the more significant, just by virtue of the number of times it appears, and by virtue of its origin in Christianity, it by far is the more important of the two. These are they likewise which are sown on stony ground, who, when they have heard the word, immediately receive it with joy. Kara, the noun for joy here. Immediately receive it with joy. Acts chapter 12 and verse 14. Whenever Peter has been supernaturally released from prison and he goes to knock on the door, then Rhoda opened not the gate for joy, but ran in and told how Peter stood before the gate. Acts 12:14. Where again it's mistranslated as gladness in the KJV. Philippians 2:29. Philippians 2:29. Receive him, Epaphroditus, therefore in the Lord with all joy, and hold such in reputation. I think the other time, well, we're going to look at one more, Luke 1:14, but most of these 59 times you'll find it, even in the KJV, correctly translated as joy. Luke 1:14. And thou shalt, well, here it's joy. Thou shalt have joy and gladness. Here's one of the places where you'll find the two words together. which obviously would mean then that gladness is not the same as joy, and therefore in Mark 4, Acts 12, and Philippians 2 would obviously have a mistranslation, since the Greek is not the word for gladness but the word for joy. And thou shalt have joy and gladness, and many shall rejoice at his birth. We're not going to look at the word gladness just because the word joy is the broader of the two terms. And all of the happiness and myrrh that one can see in gladness would be seen in joy, but joy would be more inclusive. But the words are different. Thou shalt have joy and gladness, and many shall rejoice at his birth. They could be, in some sense of the word, spoken of and thought of as synonyms and therefore as synonymous of one another, but obviously not in a technical sense, or we couldn't find them in the same verse. We will speak of them more or less as synonyms, though, except to keep this word technically corrected here, kara, the 59 times where it appears. Then we have the verb, which is a little more frequent than the noun. Kairos. C-H-A-I-R long O. The verb, which appears 74 times. It appears 74 times. Kairo. Kara is generally translated joy. Kairo is generally translated rejoice, because it's the verb and not the noun. So it's generally translated as rejoice. However, several times it's used as a salutation in coming or going. And I'm going to point these places out and how it's translated. And here it's okay the way it's been translated. It obviously wouldn't mean rejoice there. It would take on a technical sense, as we had discussed shalom, eirene before, with peace, used as a salutation in coming or going. Mark these down for being translated as hail, H-A-I-L. You know, whenever you greet someone, the KJV has hail. Matthew 26:49 and 27:29 and 28:9. Mark 15:18. Luke 1:28 and John 19:3. Just look at the last one to show you a sentence there. It's always, in these cases in the KJV, as hail. That's a King James word, but I assume we understand what that means. John 19:3. And said, Hail, King of the Jews, and they smote him with their hands. Then we find it sometimes as greeting. Acts 15:23. Acts 15:23, you will see it as greeting there. This is at the beginning of the letter sent out from the church at Jerusalem. Another part of a letter is over in the 23rd chapter, in verse 26. Claudius Lysias unto the most excellent governor Felix sendeth Cairo, greeting. Instead of sendeth rejoice, that wouldn't make any sense, sendeth rejoice. But it was a word that, when it was used in this sense, took on a technical meaning as a salutation in coming or going. Then over in 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 11, here we're going to see it as farewell. Here it's parting. First of all, we saw it as greeting twice in Acts. Greeting in Acts 15 and Acts 23. 2 Corinthians 13:11. Finally, brethren, rejoice. No, probably farewell is fine. Be perfect, be of good comfort, be of one mind, live in peace, and the God of love and of peace shall be with you. In James 1:1, we go back to it being used as greeting. 3 passages like that then. Acts 15:23, 23:26, and James 1:1. He sendeth his word to the 12 tribes, and he says, greeting. And then if you look in 2 John This will cover 2 times in 2 John. This will cover all the places where it occurs in the New Testament as a greeting or a parting word. Other times it will be like rejoice. 2 John verses 10 and 11. If there come any unto you and bring not this doctrine, receive him not into your house, neither bid him, and old Godspeed is an old King James word here. Neither bid him Godspeed. We don't have theos here, the Greek word for God. We don't have that at all here. We just have greeting, or hello, or farewell, or something like that. Neither bid him greeting or farewell. One of those words would probably be a better translation, greeting or farewell. For he that biddeth him greeting or farewell is partaker of his evil deeds. Maybe greeting would even be a better term than farewell. But he probably has reference to either parting or coming salutation or word that's given to these heretics that are under consideration here in 2 John. But both times in the KJV it's translated with this old English term of Godspeed. Godspeed came from good speed. Some people have the name today, good speed. It originated from that. Okay, that's all we're going to do technically about the 2 terms up here on the board in front of you. For a noun we have 59 times, for a verb we have 74 times. Remember what we're talking about, joy. What actually is joy? Well, what it is not a transient emotion that's based on positive circumstances, as the dictionary defines it. That probably is the lay conception of joy. It's a transient emotion. It's an emotion that can come and go, that's here and that's gone. And what makes you joyful? Positive circumstances. Do negative circumstances make you joyful? No. Therefore, you don't have the joy of the Thessalonians and the Thessalonians in 1 Thessalonians 1:6. They received the word in affliction with the joy of the Holy Spirit. But the dictionary and most people think of joy like they have false conceptions of peace and everything else. They have a false conception that joy is a here, today, gone tomorrow, now you see it, now you don't. Emotion that's based on your well-being, based on positive circumstances. For us, we would think based on good news. We hear good news, we're joyful about it. We hear bad news, we're not joyful. We don't hear any news, then we have the Stoic doctrine of resignation. Then we're indifferent. We're not happy, and we're not downcast. We're not sad, we're not glad. So one thing that it is not, it's not a transient emotion that is based on positive circumstances. As a matter of fact, just about any definition will somehow connect joy with external circumstances. And the New Testament conception of the term joy is not, in any sense of the word, based on any external circumstances. Now mark it down and remember that. Christian joy is not connected with external circumstances at all. Not only is it not based on them, that would be one thing, but I'm saying something more profound than that. It is not connected to external circumstances at all. But rather it is an internal spiritual quality of life that comes as a gift from God. And as I said earlier, there seems to be a connection between it and the Holy Spirit. Well, there are connections with everything in the Holy Spirit and everything in the Father and everything in the Son. But I have found it interesting that charismatic people generally are joyful people. I mean, that's even the stereotype there. They sing the happy praise songs. And everybody else in the church sings the dead, dry songs. They're just not happy. And I can't remember a lot of happiness, a lot of joy prior to receiving the Holy Spirit. Amen. He brought love and a lot of other things. He brought them in the sense that it seems like because you're having a deeper spiritual experience and a deeper relationship with the Lord, then He brings these things with Him in a more complete sense than before. But why is it? It's joy. It's not, let's say, the ability to control yourself that we call temperance. That should come, but that's not something that you would just say characterized as charismatics. Is basically charismatic people or temperate people. Or let's get into even another concept, we'll be to it later, that maybe some people would think in the back of their mind is even contradictory to what we're looking at tonight, and that would be dignity. Dignity. We're going to have to understand what that word means, and there are false concepts of what it means to be a dignified person. Can you be dignified and have Christian joy at the same time? Well, both are commanded as virtues in the New Testament. To have dignity and to have Christian joy. Some people, you see, have joy and they don't have any dignity to them. And some people have dignity and they have no joy. So we saw that peace then was soundness or wholeness. Hope was anticipation. Joy is perfect exultation. Peace was soundness. Hope was anticipation. Joy is perfect exultation as an internal spiritual quality. Now, if it doesn't sound like I'm really joyful right now, it's because I'm experiencing some of the peace I had from the last message. And so if you have some of the peace, you can also have the joy, but maybe it doesn't manifest itself like some people think of. And we're going to get into exactly the manifestations of joy here in a moment that you probably will find very interesting. Perfect exaltation. All of these things are spiritual qualities. All of these things are inner qualities, though. I mean, peace. Peace is not based on external circumstances, not connected to them. Love is not connected to external circumstances. I can love them if, I will be joyful if, I will be joyful when. I will be glad when I hear, when I have. And then you finish the sentence with whatever it is going to make you happy. That's fleeting happiness, though. It's the now you see it, now you don't, here it is, and there it goes type of emotion, the transient emotion that goes up and down. And that's what the Greek philosophers were reacting against. They said something about this is not healthy not to Christian. They weren't thinking of the Christian sense at all, but to human endeavor. It's not healthy to human endeavor to be here you see it, now you don't, up and down, kind of glad and then sad and then sad and then glad back and forth all the time. And you know what? The message of Christianity comes along saying that's exactly right. That is not healthy for a person to experience. Extreme forms of happiness or gladness and extreme forms of sadness at the same time. So what's our solution? Well, the philosopher said our solution is somewhere in between. Indifference, resignation. Resign yourself to fate. Don't smile, wear gray clothes, wear a gray mask, gray hair, gray hat, gray shoes, drive a gray car, live in a gray home, have gray grass. Everything's gray. Everything is neutral, in other words. It's all neutral. That's the Greek answer. That's some people's answer today. I'm not going to commit myself to this. You find people, they just will not be joyful about anything. Amen. They will not commit themselves to smiling and showing some happiness or joyfulness over something and rejoicing about it because they've done it before. And then someone said, but let me tell you the rest of the story. It's like one of these things, you've heard these old jokes. I won't tell one. The one I know is not a very good one to tell, that I've got some good news and some bad news. What do you want to hear? Well, let me hear the bad news first. And then I'm contemplating whether I should tell it or not. I'll tell it anyway. It's not that bad. Back in the 19th century, here we go. Just to pause for a moment, because this joke came to my mind. The bad news and the good news, which do you want to hear? Back in the 19th century, the Army was on patrol. They had an Indian scout there, and the Army was on patrol and came and told the captain there, Indian scout said, I've got some bad news and some good news. He said, well, let me hear the bad news first. So he was a smart fellow, because that's what I like to hear first, the bad news first. Eat your bad food first. Read your bad mail first. You have something good to look forward to. The bad news first. He said, we're out of food, and all we have to eat is buffalo chips. And the captain said, well, tell me the good news. He said, there's plenty of it. Don't forget that joke now. I don't know how those things come out. I don't even have them in my notes here. They come out anyway. Well, we've got to have an answer to this, though. If we don't like this up and down, commit yourself, and then you find out the whole story here, and things aren't so good after all. Well, you almost have one of three picks, only three picks. Either stay sad, stay glad, or stay in between. Now, to stay in between is Greek philosophy. Just resign yourself. You will never see a skip to your walk. Even if something good happens, you got a raise on the job because you might get fired tomorrow. Is what you think. And so I got a raise, but I could get fired, so I'm not going to be happy about that. You know, you got a car. It could be wrecked tomorrow. Anything could happen negatively, so I'm not going to be too happy or sad. I'm going to stay in between. A lot of people do that. A lot of people are perpetual pessimists. They're down at the bottom all the time. Obviously, you can tell if those are 2 out of 3 options and we reject those 2, that only leaves us with 1 then. Amen. And that's Christian joy. That Christian joy is to be perpetual because it's not based or not connected to external circumstances. These other faults and problems that people have seen in this whole concept of joy always break down to this one issue here. Well, what if things really don't work out? And that means the emotions through which one is going, they are founded upon external circumstances. And if they're not totally founded upon them, they're at least connected in some way to external circumstances. We can't control the externals. We don't know what tomorrow holds. But as the song goes, we know who holds tomorrow, though. And that should be what causes a Christian not to ever enter into any period of despair. You can hear the bad news and then the good news later, and you were just as joyful when you heard the bad news as when you heard the good news. You could hear the good news first and the bad news later. And the Christian was just as joyful whenever he heard the latter as whenever he heard the former. Joy is not like human happiness. Happiness is a term that's almost a more secular term than a biblical one. Unless you see it coming under the umbrella of joy. Then gladness, happiness, and all of the rest of this can come under the umbrella of joy. But using it in the sense that a lot of people do, the happiness of this world and the joy of the Bible are not even related. The joy of the Bible is not human happiness. If you'll turn over to Job chapter 20 and verse 5, here we're going to see the concept of joy or happiness or gladness, but it's in the context of a lost man. And therefore, we should not interpret this as being a picture of biblical joy, but of human happiness. Job 20 and verse 5. Knowest thou not this of old, since man was placed upon the earth? Watch this wisdom here in the book of Job. That the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite but for a moment. Now we could paraphrase that to say the happiness, because joy, he's not using it in the biblical sense of the term joy here, because it's impossible for Christian joy or for Old Testament Jewish joy to be joy that is but for a moment. Joy is enduring. Joy is lasting. It weathers every storm. It weathers every negative possibility or every negative thought of a negative possibility. It will weather everything. For the hypocrite, for the person of the world, they have what we call human happiness. Why can we say here that the joy, or to paraphrase it, the happiness of the hypocrite is but for a moment? It's because it's based on his external circumstances. And his external circumstances will be positive only for a short period of time. And so while they're positive, he's positive. When they go down, then he turns sour. You know, any Christians, that they fit the same bill of this business of happiness and joy. There's no persistent, consistent, enduring, lasting joy in their life. They'll go through a little difficulty here, and they enter despair. And if they go through the despair and the joy often enough, what you hit, and you'll find old people like this, they've gone through enough joy and enough despair, sadness and gladness, that they hit resignation then. I'm going to stay stuck right here on resignation. I've experienced that up and down the ladder, up and down the scale, on again, off again, sadness and gladness business, and that is so taxing on human emotions. And you know what? That's exactly right. It's extremely taxing on your mind, your ability to even live another day, to go through the extremes of being very sad or very glad, to go through the extremes. Now, if you want to be glad all the time, then we have no problem. It's not up and down then. But to be very glad, very joyful, very sad, very unhappy, back and forth, probably the person, if they don't have any Christian sense and therefore no Christian joy, they're going to sooner or later come up with the wise notion, let's hit resignation then. Pessimistic indifference. But I'm not going to commit myself either way. And I feel sorry. I'm thinking of someone in particular that I know who's like that, and I kind of feel sorry for the person because they're missing out on a lot of joy in their life. They think the wisest, the most mature, the best thing to do is hit this middle road of indifference or resignation. So happiness we see according to Job, worldly joy, we could say. Since it is experienced by the hypocrite, that means that worldly happiness or this type of joy is an experience of the whole world. Every human being goes through a period of happiness in their life. Happy this day, maybe not the next, but happy this day, maybe not the next. And it seems like their happiness is almost like a temporary escape from the world. Good news brings happiness, which brings a temporary escape from the pressures of life then. And they use these periods of happiness as periods of escape. You think of your happiness in your past life. Didn't it just feel so good to be happy for a whole day? Just happy. But what that was an escape from the pressures of the world. It was an escape from the pressures of life. That's what you used it for. Be happy for a period of time.
For the continuation of this